Aaron Greenwald, testing React Native, lessons from the battlefield. Testing React Native applications is different from web, has different sets of challenges, and I want to welcome him on stage.
All right. Thank you, Rick. Hello. Ooh, I feel a boom in my voice. I love it. All right, we on? We on? Okay. It's a mouse. Hello, everybody. My name is Aaron Greenwald, which is what he just said. We're going to talk about testing React Native, which is what's on the screen. All right. I love standing up on top and like just looking and chilling, and then I realize I have to speak, and it gets really uncomfortable because I'm not always ready. But here we go. Oh, by the way, Michel, the MobX guy, he's speaking in the other room. Don't go. I'm just saying. Let's all tweet during my talk, like funny things about him because they show up on the screen there. And then, just troll him the whole time. I've been bothering him all day, and now it's payback. All right? So while you all tweet, I'm going to talk. Testing React Native lessons from the battlefield. Before we start, the surveys. Show of hands, how many people are tired of raising their hands and telling the speakers how much React Native they know? Good. I was nervous I'd be the only one, and then I'd be like really awkward. Good. So I'm only going to do one more question. How many people here write automated tests? TDD, not TDD, I don't care. Pretty good. How many people? Keep your hands up. How many people, in addition to that, wish they wrote tests, believe in tests, but, excuses? Okay, also a bunch, which is nice to know. How many people here don't need no stinking tests? You're better than that. Tests are stupid. I'm just here because I don't like the other guys talk. Huh? There's always one. We're going to have a conversation afterwards. But for now, we and you. So I'm going to tell you a story, okay? A story that starts a long, long time ago. In fact, about October 2015, I think it was, when the world was a different place. Now, October 2015 is quite a long time ago if you're a dog, and a really long time ago if you're a JavaScript developer. In fact, I used to look like that, okay? And to my mother's chagrin, I don't anymore. It's not really a choice for her. People used to say things like that on the internet, and the world has indeed changed. And most of all, I was an Angular developer, okay? Don't throw tomatoes, I was. And it wasn't bad, okay? Life was pretty good. In fact, if I had to characterize 2015 in any one word, I would say it was boring, right? So we decided to shake it up a little bit and change things. And the first change I made was I was living in the USA at the time, which is far away, and I got a job at Wix, which is in Tel Aviv, headquartered, and so I moved there. It was a pretty good place to move. Wix, in case you didn't hear from Talco's talk, is a place where a company that allows customers to build websites and manage their businesses and all that stuff. And so when I got there, a lot of what Wix does is built in React, but a lot of their web stuff is also built in Angular. And when I got there, I was under the impression that I'd be doing Angular work because, that's what I was doing. Great. So I get there on my first day. I sit down with my new boss. His name was Avner. I sit with him over lunch, and he says to me, we're starting this new project. This new project's going to be a mobile app. We think that our users really need a mobile app to manage their businesses, because even though they build a website, then they need to be able to communicate with customers and things like that. And we picked React Native for this. Have you heard of React Native? And I'm like, I don't know what's that, right? So he says, well, it's this good tool. You can write applications for JavaScript in JavaScript for Android, iOS, and he sells me on it. And I say, oh, okay. He says, well, you think you can handle it? Is it good for you? And I say, I can do anything, right? Nothing scares me. So yeah, valiant and brave, count me in, right? So turns out I'm not really Clint Eastwood. Surprise, even though I am American. And I'm more like this guy. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. You allowed to curse on stage? Is it going to get bleeped out? Okay. Anyway, so I don't know what I'm doing, right? It's the first day. And for all you newcomers who came in and just drinking coffee and everything, I'm not blaming you or anything. I'm just saying one of the things we all agreed on before you came in late was that we were going to tweet during the talk nasty things about Michel, and all the people watching him are going to hopefully laugh at him because we're mean. Not really. I like him. He's a great guy. But anyway, so I get there, and I don't know what I'm doing. Why? Because it's React Native 13. React Native 13, for those of you who remember, I remember because I'm old, is a long time ago, and things were just getting started, okay? Android support had just come out, kind of, okay? It was official Android support. It didn't really work. Development was fast and furious. Everything was changing every 2 weeks, breaking changes. It was all we could do just to keep up. We were spinning our wheels just trying to, oh, what? This doesn't work. What are we going to do? Google it. Oh, there's an open pull request for it in React Native. Oh, it's going to be fixed in the future release. Now I have to keep upgrading and breaking my application. That was the world of React Native a year and a half ago. It was a full-time job just to spin in place. And we come and say, we need to do better than this. We need to tame this wild beast. Why? Well, the first day I got to Wix, maybe the second day, one of the things they do is they send you to this kind of like crash course or, I don't know, re-education camp or, whatever it is. Basically, they kind of brainwash you. And by the time I was done that week, I totally believed in TDD, okay? I was like, yeah, we need to test everything, TDD, we're going to do this. And we have a lot of experience because we're a web company. We've been doing this in Angular and React for years, so no problem. How do we TDD React Native, right? We're only a few people on this team and we think we're going to do it, but it turns out it's tricky. Now, show of hands again. Sorry, guys. How many people here are familiar with testing pyramid? Most of you, so I'm going to go through it very quickly. For those of you who aren't, the idea of the testing pyramid is a conceptual model for how you break up your tests across your application. At the top of the pyramid, you have what's usually called UI automation or integration or ETE tests. I'm going to call them ETE tests, okay? And these tests are, there are not that many of them. That's why it's at the top of the pyramid. It's a narrowed point. It's actually a triangle, by the way. Okay, I've never seen a three-dimensional rendering of this, but they call it the pyramid. At the top, there's this narrow point that says we have a few tests that are end-to-end. They test the entire system as a box. You do something. I'm a user. I go to the login form. I type my username. I type my password. I click submit. Now, let's test them. Actually, if a user does that, they actually get logged in. That's an ETE test, okay? Then you have something that's often, by the way, the pyramid was first come up with a guy named Mike Cohn, okay? I don't really know who he is, but that's what the internet said. And he called this service layer, okay? So if you look this up, you might find a little bit different terminology. But I call it component for a reason. I'm going to get to that. The component test is a little bit lower down in your stack. It doesn't test the whole system as one big thing. But it's still somewhere in the middle, and you have a few more of those. And of course, the opposite extreme is the unit test. These are tests that test one little piece, okay? I have a function. It takes some input. It gives me some output. I test that it indeed does what I'm supposed to do. So why is this a pyramid? Well, in the perfect world, I'd only have ETE tests. Because as a developer, I really want my app to work for users. And as a user, I don't really care how the internals work. I just care that the app works. And the way I'm going to test that is by checking that when the user does X, Y happens. So really, all I want is ETE tests. I don't want anything else. The reason that we do other things, the reason that we mix and match these layers of the pyramid, is that ETE tests have two downsides. One, they're slow. Okay? They're slow to run, slow to write. Every time you want to run them, you have to kind of initialize an entire environment, whether it's a native app or even a web app. It's a lot of initialization. It takes a long time, relatively, in test time, which means that you don't run them as frequently, you don't get feedback as frequently, and you might not even run them at all before you push, and then they run in CI and they take a long time and then they fail. So that's one downside. The other downside, which is kind of related, is that when everything's green, when the tests pass, then you're in really good shape. You know that your app works, right? Because you actually tested what a user is going to do and it worked. But when they're red, what do you know? Not that much. You don't know where the bug is. If I tried to log in and I failed, maybe the database system isn't working, maybe the service layer in between isn't working, maybe the submit button isn't wired up correctly. Any number of things could have gone wrong. And because I'm out in the air, now I have to spend a lot of time troubleshooting. I don't want to do that. I want instant feedback that says, hey, you just created a bug on line 56. And an ETE test can't do that. A unit test can. A unit test can run very quickly, immediately tell me I just created a bug. So we have these two extremes, and so we mix and match to get the best of both worlds. Of course, a unit test, the big problem with unit tests, even though they're really fast, is you could check that all the little pieces work individually, but that doesn't mean they work together, all right? So it's great that this works, and this works, and this works, and this works, but they don't talk to each other. They don't, the output of one doesn't match the input of the other. Your app it doesn't work. So we create this pyramid, okay? This is an old idea. And we take this pyramid and we say, let's bring it to React Native. And we'll start from the bottom, unit tests. Good news, this is easy, okay? I would say the strength, or one of the big strengths of React Native is that most of your app is just JavaScript. And the JavaScript world is a very mature environment. There's a lot of tooling out there, okay? I like to say on days that leftpad is not unpublished, everything works in the JavaScript world. And because of that, you probably already have a testing framework. What was this? Barack Obama was famous for saying, if you like your doctor, you'll be able to keep your doctor. And I like to say about the React Native unit tests that if you like your JavaScript testing framework, you can keep your JavaScript testing framework. I don't care if you use Jasmine or Mocha or Jest or whatever. It doesn't really matter because everything at this layer is just plain vanilla JavaScript. And whatever you're used to, you can continue to do. When we started, we were coming from an Angular world where Jasmine was popular. We continued to use Jasmine. Then many of us, the team got bigger. Some people wanted to use Mocha, so they used Mocha. Then people wanted to use Jest, they used Jest. Right now, we have a hodgepodge of different projects within React Native that use different testing frameworks for the unit layer, and that's OK. This is easy, so I'm not really going to talk about it much because it doesn't actually have to do with React Native. This is an old problem and a solved one. Component testing. Here things got tricky. If you Google component testing for React Native, or if you did a year and a half ago, and I did, the first thing that comes up is Enzyme. Now, Enzyme is a testing, or I would say, a library for rendering in tests, for mock rendering React components. Essentially, what that gives you is a way to test with whatever test harness and test runner you like. You can use it with Jasmine or Mocha, or it doesn't matter, or Jest. But Enzyme gives you a way to, we're going to talk about how, render a React component and then make assertions on that component in a very jQuery-like way. You have access to the DOM. I put in air quotes. You don't, not a real DOM, but you have access to the React component tree, which is really useful. And so we said to ourselves, this is the de facto standard in React Native, in React development. We'll take that to React Native, why not? Well, what we discovered is that there is the concept of shallow versus deep or full DOM rendering, okay? In Enzyme, you have two options every time you render a component. You either give it to, you use a function called mount, which means you take this component, function, okay? You mount it with a set of props, and it actually renders, using JSDOM or some kind of, or a headless browser or whatever, it actually renders the entire component tree beneath it. And then you can make assertions on that tree. That's great. That's really what you want to do. Okay? They also have the concept of shallow rendering, which they say is if you just want to make an assertion on the first level, it only renders one level deep. What that means is two things. It doesn't give you access to component lifecycle functions. Those are those component did mount, component will unmount, component did receive props. If you have any code there, you can't access them in a shallow render test because you didn't actually render the component. You just kind of said, here's some props. Now let's check what the first level of rendering does. OK? And of course, the second problem is refactoring. Those of you who are familiar with TDD philosophy and testing in general, a big idea in testing is that if I have a function, and I write a test for it. I say, this function should do X. I'm passing it parameter X. It's going to do something, and I'm going to get out Y. And then that function starts getting bigger, it gets bigger, and it gets ugly. And I say, I'm going to refactor this. I'm going to pull out part of this logic, put it over here in a separate function that I can reuse elsewhere. Great, right? The whole point is that the test is supposed to continue to be green. If the test now fails, then I can't refactor, or I have to rewrite the test. What kind of assurance does the test give me? The whole reassurance I want from a test is that I can now change the code without the test breaking because the functionality at the end of the day still works. And when you shallow render, you can't because the assertions you make are only one level deep. You can say, I have a component, login form, and I want to check that it has within it 2 inputs and a submit button. But if I decide to pull those 2 inputs into a separate child component that I'm now going to be able to reuse, let's call it the, I don't know, the 2 input component, okay? Because in a lot of places in my app, I have one input after another. Great, now I can't assert that there are 2 inputs because there aren't 2 inputs. There's just this one 2 input component. God, that sounds confusing. But I hope you get the idea. So shallow rendering is really less than ideal. Honestly, I read the Enzyme documentation, and I don't really understand where it's valuable. Okay? At the same time, we have a problem, which is that you can't do full DOM rendering with React Native. Why? Well, think about it. What happens when you render a native component? I have a view. Is it actually a view at the bottom layer? No. It gets translated into some kind of native component. But I'm running my tests in Node. I don't have a way to fake it. I either render shallow in Enzyme, or I don't render at all. I can't truly render React Native inside Node without it dying. In fact, if you do any imports to anything that uses React Native, in a node test, you'll get this error. Usually the error you get is underscore underscore dev underscore underscore is not defined, because React Native declares that globally. Anything you import React Native, it tries to find that, and I'm not in a React Native environment. I'm just in a node, so it dies. And so if you often get this error in your enzyme tests, and you're stuck. What ends up happening is you end up with a lot of mocks, okay? It's the really only way around it. There's a library, an enzyme recommends, if you want to do enzyme with React Native, they recommend, oh, no problem, use this library React Native mock, which is really cool because it mocks the entire React Native. That's great. Well, first of all, mocks are not really good in tests, because a mock it's a mock. It's fake. You're not actually testing what you want to be testing, right? Okay, so every time you use a mock, you're sacrificing something. You're saying, I'm only testing up until the mock, and if the test might pass, but the true implementation changed, now I don't know that. Okay. So a mock is always a compromise, especially a compromise when even if you got this library React Native mock and you're mocking the entire React Native, and that's really nice, it doesn't help you when it comes to some kind of third party. And if you heard Talcol's talk earlier, you know that we have tons and tons of third-party or in-house native code that we wrote that we turned into components. So now a native developer wrote this component. That's that card you saw that slides across the screen. Really cool, and it's got all kinds of nice tricks in it. But now if I import that, boom, I can't test this component anymore because it's imported. So now I have to mock that, and I end up mocking tons of things, and it becomes just a lot of boilerplate. Okay, compare this with, or contrast this with your pure JavaScript unit test, where you might write 5 lines of code and get a whole bunch of coverage out of it, because you know that you wrote 5 lines of test code, and now you know that this thing works. Let's say it's Redux. I say bootstrap the store, dispatch an action, and check that the state changed. That's my logic. I know my logic works, and I only have to write 5 lines. In an enzyme test, I probably wrote 30 lines just setting up the component test, and all I know is that this component actually has within it 2 children, but I don't know what those 2 children are. And if there are any lifecycle functions, I'm up the creek without a paddle. What that leads us to is that your architecture really matters, okay? I once gave a whole talk on this topic, and I'm going to give a synopsis right now. Separate your code into single responsibility functionality, okay? If you have components, the components should do one thing. They should render view. If you have components, right? And your logic, pull it out. If you find that you have logic inside your components, that's code that's going to be hard to test. It might be testable, but you're going to have to do a lot of work for it. Anytime you pull that code out and you put it inside some kind of pure JavaScript file, you can now do whatever testing you like. So when you start with your app from the beginning, from day one, keep your components lean, because the component testing layer is the weakest link in the entire ecosystem here. It's difficult to use, it's troublesome, and it doesn't really give you that much return on investment, so to speak, coverage for lines of test code written. So architect your application nicely, adhere to the single responsibility principle. A component should do just one thing. It should render one thing. A logic should be kept into a file that just does that logic. Then you can test things easily, nicely, cleanly, and you will thank me later, I promise. Yeah, actually, I don't know. Maybe you won't thank me because you're a jerk. I don't know, but you should. Okay? Now, Jest. I can't talk about React Native testing and not talk about Jest. It's like against the law, especially because a little while ago, React Native decided to include Jest for free in every React Native init. So now Jest has become the de facto way to test. But I have to be honest, I haven't used it, okay? Many people at Wix have used it, but primarily not for snapshot testing, which is what it offers for component testing. Because if you look at the Jest documentation, what you'll find is that for unit testing, I mean, it's another philosophy. It's great. You can use it. Nothing against it. If you like Jest instead of Jasmine, use it. If you want to use Mocha, use it. Whatever, right? When it comes to component testing, the only offer they have is either use Jest with Enzyme, which we just talked about, or do snapshot testing. Well, snapshot testing is not what I'm looking for. What I'm looking for is the ability to TDD. What I'm looking for is the ability to write a test that says, I am compelled to write code. TDD says, I write a test that says, I need X, Y, and Z to happen, and then I have to make it happen. Snapshot testing is a nice idea, and I'm not saying not to do it. If you like to do it in addition, go for it. But it's not what I'm looking for here, and it doesn't solve the problem I have. So although I'm still looking at it, and some people at Wix have already jumped on the bandwagon and really love Jest, and all the power to them, I don't think it's the end of the story here, okay? In my opinion. Where it really gets interesting is the top of the pyramid. The top of the pyramid is the ETE layer. Now, we called it ETE. Why? Because what I want from this layer is the ability to pretend I'm a user. To say, something happens, a user does something, and the application does whatever it does. Do not be fooled by the fact that this is the smallest part of the pyramid. The fact that there's only a few of them, many people say, oh, I only need 5 ETE tests, or 3 or 2. That's great. I don't disagree with that. You only need a few maybe. But those are critical. I can't tell you how many times I've had an application where all the tests pass, everything's great, and you get a red screen of death, okay? Really, the red screen in React Native is like the new Microsoft blue screen of death. It happens so frequently because we screw things up. That's fine, right? But it can happen because you imported something badly, or you have 2 modules that totally work independently, but they interact in a bad way. And these are things that your unit or your component test won't catch. So the only way to know that your app actually works in production, that it really runs, that the user can run it without crashing, is to have at least a few end-to-end tests or UI automation tests. What happened? What's the story here? Well, when we started, again, we looked for a way to automate testing in React Native or mobile in general, and we came up with this, Appium. You heard Ram talk about it earlier, okay? And Appium is, again, the de facto or standard tool in this space. We had a lot of trouble, okay? Let's take a look at some code. Now, if you have sharp eyes, you may notice on the top left corner, top left? Yeah, left. Yeah, it says XIT, right? Why? Because we had to comment out the test because it didn't even work. After all this work, which is a lot of work, and you're probably reading it by now and not listening to me, it's a lot of lines of code, and it doesn't do anything because it doesn't work. Why? Because it's flaky. Look at the 4th line to the bottom. Await driver.sleep 500. What kind of smell is that? I have a line of code that tells my test to sleep for half a second because otherwise I couldn't get it to pass. The next line, save, click, send button. Click on something with the ID send button, but try up to a second to do it. Why? Because, again, the app, the simulator is doing things on its own time, and Appium is trying to do things with it, but it doesn't know in any way, has no idea where the device is up to. So it's like, okay, go click. Oh, I tried to click, it wasn't there yet. Okay, I'll try again. You know how this works under the hood? You know how we made this work? This driver thing is helper methods that we wrote, where we add to the WebDriver all kinds of methods, like type on keyboard, and look carefully, the 3rd line. I'm executing a string. This is eval, essentially, okay? I'm executing a string in order to make this work. I have to write all this, and then, oh, wow, I have a loop that says try up to val.length, which is wherever it is, and then sleep 150, that's the length of the string, sorry. Sleep 150 milliseconds in between, and then run this command. That's ridiculous. Again, here, in order to get the helper, the assertion, expect element to not exist, which is a very common kind of assertion, I have to write this entire thing, which has another loop inside and sleeps. So all of this junk that we had to write just to get our tests to work didn't even work, and we had to XIT our tests to make it happen. Why? Well, the answer, I like to say, lies in a couple of acronyms. The first acronym that I had problems with was WD, it stands for WebDriver. And it was a library app. The way Appium works is it says, okay, you use a WebDriver implementation of Selenium, which this is the particular one that is standard to use. You use this client to hit the simulator or device and tell it to do things, okay, from the outside. Appium's philosophy, they say this right on their website, is you shouldn't have to put anything in your app to make the tests work. You should be able to hit the app from the outside. That's what an end-to-end test is. WD, but it was very painful to do. You just saw the helper methods I had to write. IWD, oh, wow. Turns out, Apple doesn't really want you to automate things against the simulator because of a security concern. And they've done a lot of work to make you not do that. They put delays. When you try to automate things against the simulator, there's 1 or 2 second delay. I think it changed from 2 to 1 at one point. It throttles you. So now your tests run slowly, very slowly, okay? And instruments without delay, that's IWD, is this kind of hack that I think was Facebook first who did, and then Appium took over, that hacks the simulator to allow you to do this, okay? And of course, you're always keeping up, because every time there's any version comes out or any update to Xcode, you know what an Xcode update looks like. Like you wait like 6 hours for this update, and then boom, oh, all my tests are failing now. I got to rehack IWD. It's very frustrating. And of course, the last acronym, which I can't remember what it stands for, but I said it a lot, okay? It was the whole thing, just one big that. So let's get to the point. What's the most important thing? What's the most important thing in an end-to-end test? The bottom line, of course, that it passes. But you need to be stable. You need to report to you when things work. If it's green, I need to know that the code actually works, and if it's red, I need to know it doesn't work. And if it's red because something is flaky but it really should be green, then I stop trusting the test. And if I stop trusting the test, I stop running the test. And if I stop running the test, then I don't have any test at all. I may as well have not done it. And two, it needs to be fast. If it's not fast, I don't wait for the test to be green before I push. If I push, then again, the system falls apart. I need these two things. So what do? We reframe the problem. By we, I mean other people who, mostly Tal. He says to me early on days, Appium's not the right solution. We're going to come up with something else. And I say, that's great. Go ahead, do it. I got a product to build. Anyway, he comes back to me a couple months later and he says, yeah, I have this thing. It's called Detox, and it uses UI automation philosophy instead of ETE. What does that mean? I'm going to compromise a little bit. I'm going to put something inside the app that will sidestep Apple's issues because I'm not hitting the app from outside the simulator. It's based on Earl Grey, if you're familiar, for iOS. And over a WebSocket, your test talks to another client inside the app in debug mode that can then automate things. What does this give you? This is the repo. What does this give you? A stable, fast, and React Native friendly testing system. Why do I say React Native friendly? Because actually this isn't React Native only. There's nothing about Detox that's React Native specific. It's just a way to automate actions against a native application, because that's all, when it comes to the ETE layer, that's all it is anyway. It's just a mobile app. But because us React Native people were mostly web developers, and we like JavaScript, and we were familiar with Protractor and jQuery and all this stuff, it gives you this kind of API that's familiar. It gives you a JavaScript API that you can use to control, it's a wrapper on top of Earl Grey, you can use to control the app from a test. This is what it looks like, okay? This is a GIF. I took it right off of the README. You can see the app is actually moving very quickly. There's tests running in a console. There's code, which you can't really read, and basically says things should happen. But you can notice that each should here is about 2 lines, okay? Do this, take some action, assert something. Detox gives you the ability to do both actions and assertions, runs it against the simulator really fast. We have it running in production. It works beautifully. What's the bottom line? Bottom line is this. If you're on the Detox team, please make Detox for Android. It's under active development. I'm not related to the team in any way, by the way. I just happen to work at the same company. I'm a user of this product, and I know that they're working very hard on making Detox happen for Android. It will happen soon. But if you're us and you're a user, then what you essentially have is this. You came to React Native. You wanted a test. Well, we're all here on different levels. I'm going to go through this, depending on where you came in, what I want you to walk out of the room with. If you came into the room clueless, you don't know anything about testing, you don't know anything about React Native, but you heard that you should do it, this is what I offer you. Pick something just as common these days for the unit test. Maybe ignore the component tests for now because they get complicated. Use Detox for the end-to-end test. You'll have some coverage. If you're a beginner, maybe you have some opinions, you have a testing framework you like, use it. It's OK. Use whatever you want on the component side. I'm sorry, on the unit side. And I do urge you to try out Enzyme if you like my approach. I do urge you to try out Enzyme for component tests, and again, Detox for the ETE test. If you were that guy, right, who thinks that testing is stupid, I hope that I convince you that it's at least possible. Maybe you still think it's stupid, but don't tell me it's impossible. It's possible you can TDD a React Native app. And if you're an expert, if you have opinions, if you know things about frameworks, if you write on frameworks, please, the Detox team that I know is very, very interested in contributions from the community. They can use their help. We can make things better together. We can do this. Please, pull requests, comments, documentation. Try it out, give feedback. These are things that we can do as a community to make the testing story better for React Native. Bottom line, what we have right now is a much more stable environment, lots of options, and few excuses. Thank you very much. If you have questions, talk to me afterwards.
All right.